The 2012 playoffs were very exciting. We had some people who, well, there were obvious mismatches. The Spurs and the Thunder both swept their opponents, which the Jazz, they barely fought their way into the playoffs to begin with. You didn't really expect them to go to the second round, but the Mavericks, the defending champions, swept in the opening round. A lot of people were shocked about that. I was kind of expecting it just because they hadn't been playing like the champs all year. They're not the same team they were last year, which is why I always say, the defending champion is always the lowest team on the totem pole. You've got so much more to prove. It's the only thing harder than winning a championship is repeating. Keep that in mind. But in the middle of the brackets, well, the West was a little more wide open. The Clippers, I'm not going to say they manhandled the Grizzlies, mostly because they did not. But, it was it was a very hard-fought battle. It was a very difficult series, very physical series, which the Clippers barely came away with. They were extremely banged up after that, though. And the Lakers, they just barely won a 7-game series against the Nuggets, it's the fact that the Nuggets even forced a Game 7 is just a credit to them. It was an amazing comeback. The Lakers seemingly had the series wrapped up before the Nuggets came back within a fighting chance of actually advancing. And then the Thunder, well, they pretty much dismantled the Lakers. It was a 5-game series. Thunder easily dominated them, but not as easily as the Spurs, who swept the Clippers on the way to the Western Conference Finals, where the Spurs would take a 2-game lead against the Thunder, beating them in both home games, mostly due in part to Greg Popovich demanding that his players show him some nasty. That was a huge storyline if you didn't see it. And then the Thunder, they go into Oklahoma, one of the hardest cities to play in, and they bring the noise. They brought down the house, and they easily take those 2 games to tie up the series. And then they come back in San Antonio, still Game 5, and in a deciding Game 6, the Spurs, they fight their asses off. Their starting 5 pretty much never left the field, and Steven Jackson was the only backup who got significant time. And that's because he hit 6 of 6 3-pointers, at least to start the game, and then he missed on the 7th one in the 4th quarter. But the Thunder just proved to be way too much for the aging Spurs. The Thunder, they showed too much length and athleticism, and the Spurs just could not compete with them for the length of the series. And over in the Eastern Conference, you had the number 1 seeded Bulls lose to the 76ers. And how did they lose? Well, Derrick Rose went down with an injury in Game 1 and it required season-ending surgery. And the 76ers, who barely managed to stay in the playoffs, end up upsetting the number 1 seed Bulls. That's only, I believe, the 4th time that it's ever happened. And then you have the number 2 seed Heat taking on the 7th seed Knicks. The Heat easily dominated. The Knicks managed to steal 1 game. Carmelo Anthony completely beasted this entire series, though it just wasn't quite enough to get them wins as the Heat advanced after 5 games. The Magic and the Pacers, that was an up and down series. It went for 6 games, and Pacers come out on top. The Magic, I think everyone expected them to lose. They were the 6th seed, playing without Dwight Howard, and I think people are more surprised that they didn't get swept than that they lost. And then you have the Celtics versus the Hawks. For the Hawks, the biggest storyline, Al Horford returning from injury. He didn't return immediately. It was Game 3 when he made his first start. But he provided a boost, and they fought hard for it, but the Celtics, they have too much experience on that roster. They would not let themselves be outdone. Paul Pierce definitely stepped up in that series. And then in the Eastern And then in the next second round, the Celtics took on the 76ers, and that went to 7 games with, they were trading wins every single week, every single day. It was Celtics Sixers. Nobody could win nobody could win consecutive games. But Celtics end up advancing after winning Game 7. And in the other one, you have the Heat versus the Pacers. And I think everyone pretty much expected the Heat to dominate, despite the fact that Chris Bosh, was out with an injury. But the Heat, they came out win Game 1 in deciding fashion. But then the Pacers, they come back and steal Game 2, and they're excited. The whole city is excited. Miami Heat, Dwayne Wade specifically, he seemed a little upset about the way they celebrated, and you kind of got the feeling that, the Heat won't allow them to win after something like that. But then they go back and win Game 3, and you're starting to think, maybe they have this game on hand, that maybe they have this series in hand. Then the Heat come back and win the next 3, advance to the championship round, where they will face the Celtics. And they easily manhandled them. I mean, the Celtics, they're too old, they're not athletic enough, they just couldn't compete on the same level. Which brings us to the NBA Finals, which I believe almost everyone in the world was watching. Heat versus Celtics, two very young, very talented, very athletic, very versatile teams. And I believe the Thunder gave the Heat just about all they could handle. The Heat, though, they had so many playmakers. LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, 2 future Hall of Famers. Chris Bosh, potentially Hall of Famer. And they had too many other role players like Chalmers, Battier, and Mike Miller. Just wow. Everybody was hitting threes. Everybody was making plays. And there was just too many weapons. The Thunder could not keep up with them. And it was an easy 6-game victory for the Heat, who ended up winning the NBA championship. So that has been NBA Weekly. Tune in next week for the last episode of March, where we will look at all the different free agency and trade, different moves that were made in the offseason, and some teams that have benefited from it. And after that, starting in November, the first week of November, NBA Weekly, I will be doing real-time action, what's been happening in the previous week of the NBA, what's going on there. Until then, I'm Nathan Lyle. Tune in tomorrow afternoon. I'll put on reflections from Week 7 in the NFL and fantasy football. Happy Monday.